A man woke up in an intensive care unit in the middle of the night. He could barely move. Tubes ran into his arms. Machines beeped around him. He was recovering. He was getting better. Then someone turned off his machine. He had no way to call for help. He had no way to fight back. He just lay there in the dark and waited to die. But he didn't die. Not that night. When morning came, he did something desperate. He grabbed a scrap of paper and scrawled 9 words that would eventually expose one of the most terrifying medical crimes in history. What did that note say? And who was trying to kill him? This is the story of a Brazilian doctor who was supposed to save lives. Instead, investigators believe she may have ended up to 300 of them. Behind the walls of a respected hospital in southern Brazil, something deeply wrong had been happening for years, and almost no one said a word. Curitiba is a modern city in southern Brazil. It has tree-lined streets and a well-regarded healthcare system. People travel there to receive treatment at its major hospitals. The Evangelical Hospital of Curitiba was one of those places. It had a reputation. It had a large intensive care unit. The ICU was where the most critical patients ended up. The ones who needed constant monitoring. The ones who needed machines to breathe. The ones who were too sick to speak for themselves. In 2007, a doctor named Virgínia Soares de Souza became head of that ICU. She was 52 years old. She had practiced medicine for decades. Her husband had held the same position before her. He died in 2006 from colon cancer, in his own unit, under her care. But no one questioned that. She stepped in, she took over, and she got to work. To the outside world, Dr. Souza was a professional, experienced, composed. She ran her department with authority. The ICU was busy. It was always busy. Patients came in critically ill. Some recovered. Many did not. That was the nature of intensive care medicine. Death was common. Nobody looked too closely at the numbers. Not at first, but something was quietly wrong with the way patients died in her unit. They would arrive in serious but stable condition. They would seem to be improving. And then, without warning, they would crash and die. The families were told it was the illness. They were told the body had simply given up. They grieved and they went home. And another bed was opened up. Another patient was moved in. Among the nurses and junior doctors who worked in that unit, whispers began to form. A pattern was emerging. Patients who were conscious and improving were dying overnight. Patients who had been talking to their families in the evening were dead by morning. One nurse recalled a patient who had asked for a glass of water. She went to get it. When she came back, he was already gone. He had not been connected to a respirator. He had not been in critical condition. He simply died. Another patient had asked his family to bring his reading glasses. He wanted to read while he recovered. His family never got to bring them. He was dead before they returned. These are not dying people. These were people who expected to go home. Investigators later recovered audio recordings made during the investigation. In one recording, Dr. de Souza is heard describing certain patients as debris, a Portuguese term for clutter, garbage. In another, she says the following about a patient on life support. There are some patients who are dead, so turn off the things. It makes no sense. In a third recording, she described her work as helping patients onto what she called a trampoline to the beyond. She was not speaking in whispers. She was speaking plainly to colleagues, as if this were simply medical procedure, as if death were a scheduling decision. The ICU had too many patients and not enough beds. The Brazilian public health system, known as SUS, sent patients to private hospitals like the Evangelical. Those hospitals were reimbursed by the government for the care they provided. But critically ill patients stayed for a long time. They cost money. They occupied beds. They reduced the number of patients a hospital could cycle through. And more patients meant more money. Dr. de Souza had found a solution. It was efficient. It was monstrous. She and her team allegedly administered muscle relaxants to patients. These drugs paralyzed the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the muscle that makes your lungs breathe. Without it, patients on respirators are completely dependent on the machine to keep air moving. Then the machines were turned off, or the oxygen supply was reduced. The patients could not breathe on their own. They could not move. They could not call out. They asphyxiated in silence. The cause of death was recorded as the underlying illness. Nobody checked. Nobody asked. Then came the note. A patient who survived one of these apparent attempts managed to get a message out to his family. It read, "I need to get out of here because they tried to kill me today, turning off the machine all night." His family contacted authorities. Investigators were already receiving complaints from hospital staff. Now they had a survivor. Now they had something in writing. The investigation began in earnest. Federal health authorities moved in. They placed the unit under surveillance. They began reviewing patient records. What they found was staggering. In 2013, Dr. Virgínia Soares de Souza was arrested. She was 58 years old. 7 other healthcare professionals were arrested along with her. 3 were doctors. Others were nurses and a physiotherapist. Prosecutors charged them with 7 counts of murder. 7 confirmed deaths where the evidence was clearest. But the investigation did not stop there. The Brazilian Health Ministry appointed a team to audit the Evangelical Hospital. They began reviewing every death that had occurred in the ICU over the previous 6 years. The number they were looking at was 1,700 deaths. Investigators quickly identified more than 20 suspicious cases, then more than 50. The lead investigator, Dr. Mario Lobato da Costa, went on national television. He said investigators had confirmed more than 20 cases and were examining nearly 300 more. He said, what was practiced was the anticipation of death, a euphemism for crime. If the total number of victims was confirmed, Dr. de Souza would have surpassed Harold Shipman as the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. The comparison was made openly in the Brazilian press. The courtroom proceedings moved slowly. Brazil's legal system is known for its delays. Dr. de Souza was released from prison while awaiting trial. She was required to appear in court monthly to avoid rearrest. Her lawyer maintained her innocence throughout. In a televised interview recorded while she was still in police custody, she spoke calmly. She said, "I was never negligent. I was never imprudent. I never had an ethical infraction registered against me. I practiced medicine conscientiously, correctly." She acknowledged the recordings. She acknowledged the language. She said terms like debris were misunderstood. She claimed the staff members who came forward had been fired and were seeking revenge. She denied everything. She did it with the authority and composure of someone who had run a medical unit for over a decade. But the evidence was building. The audio recordings were not easy to dismiss. The patterns in the data were not easy to explain. And there were witnesses. Hospital staff who had watched what happened in that unit. People who had stayed silent for years because Dr. de Souza was their superior. Because they feared losing their jobs. Because they worked in a system that protected the powerful and left whistleblowers exposed. One investigator revealed he had come under pressure to limit the scope of the inquiry. He said the practices at the Evangelical Hospital might not be unique to Curitiba. He said his findings had implications for intensive care units across the entire country. His exact words were, "There is a hidden pressure because this, in one form or another, impacts on all intensive care units, not only in Curitiba. Everyone will have to answer for what is happening." That statement was never fully followed up. The national investigation did not expand the way he suggested it might. For the families of the victims, justice moved at an agonizing pace. Years passed. The Brazilian legal system stretched the case across multiple hearings, appeals, and procedural delays. The victims had no voice in the courtroom. They had died in the night in a place where they were supposed to be safe. Their families had been told it was natural, that medicine had done everything it could. They had grieved, not knowing they had been robbed, not knowing their loved ones had been silenced by the very people paid to keep them alive. There are things we still do not fully know. We do not know how many people truly died at the hands of Dr. de Souza and her team. The number could be 7. It could be closer to 300. The full audit was never completed in public. We do not know how many of those team members acted under orders and how many acted willingly. We do not know what happened in the room in 2006 when Dr. de Souza's own husband died in the same ICU she would later control. That detail was raised by a nurse during the investigation. Hospital administrators denied any connection. The case was not pursued further, and we do not fully know why so many people said nothing for so long. Fear, complicity, Institutional silence. Perhaps all three. What we do know is this. A man wrote 9 words on a piece of paper in the middle of the night. He could barely hold the pen. He was terrified, and those 9 words cracked open something that the hospital, and possibly the entire Brazilian healthcare system, had worked hard to keep buried. Medicine depends on trust. When you walk into an operating room, you surrender control completely. You go unconscious. You cannot see what is being done to you. You trust that the people around you are there to help. That trust is not just personal. It is the foundation of healthcare itself. When a doctor violates it, the damage goes far beyond the individuals harmed. It reaches into every hospital room, every ICU, every moment when a patient lies helpless and a doctor stands above them with the power to choose. Most doctors choose well, but the story of Curitiba asks a question that medicine has never fully answered. What happens when they don't? And who is watching?